Greetings, friends. Tonight's talk is the first of three talks on the meaning of becoming, a central theme in the Buddha's Dhamma that's often overlooked. I was a practicing Buddhist, so-called, for quite a few years before I even heard the term becoming, much less have it presented in a way that was understandable. Lay down, puppy. It's mentioned first in the dependent origination, and I'm gonna just go over that briefly before I give the talk. But the central theme in what the Buddha teaches is the potential that each moment has to either become awakened or continue to ignore the development and understanding of Four Noble Truths and become further ignorant. And that really the choice within the Dhamma and practicing authentic Dhamma is just that. So to start the talk, I'd just like to review the 12 links of dependent origination, which begins with from ignorance, and it's a very specific ignorance. It's ignorance of Four Noble Truths. From ignorance as a requisite condition comes fabrication. From fabrications comes consciousness. And again, look at the sequence here. It's very important. This is not some grand cosmic unified consciousness that we're all a part of. It's simply ongoing thinking informed by fabrications rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And those two, the first three links, point directly to what the Buddha's Dhamma is all about. It's about recognizing and abandoning wrong views or wrong ways of thinking, wrong ways of seeing ourselves in relation to the world, and directing and developing the wisdom of an awakened human being through developing understanding of Four Noble Truths. Come here. You're particularly up to the crash. Lay down. Sorry about that. Let me go back that one. From fabrications as a requisite condition comes consciousness. From consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. The Pali is namarupa. Some of you may have heard that term. Again, it's usually misunderstood and misapplied. It simply means name and form in English. And name and form simply means we are self-identifying with the objects, events, views, and ideas of our lives that are arising. But again, remember the sequence. That self-identification is ultimately with ignorant views, ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So if we're the logic there, in fact, the brilliance of the Buddha is that if we're identifying and defining ourself and our experience from anything at all that is lacking understanding, what follows can only be disappointing and stressful. And that's the nature of dukkha. Lay down both. From that consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. From name and form as a requisite condition comes the sixth sense space. The sixth sense space is our five physical senses. And that sixth sense of consciousness or ongoing thinking that is now interpreting our experience, what we're coming in contact with, through views ignorant of Four Noble Truths, and so those views are fabricated. Another word for fabrication is perverted. From the sixth sense base as a requisite condition comes contact. It simply makes sense. Look what the Buddha is describing here. It is, this isn't, again, the dependent origination is often, it's probably the most wildly and widely misunderstood and misapplied teaching, and usually done intentionally to alter, adapt, and accommodate what the Buddha awakened to justify contradictory teachings, usually teachings that have very little to do with what the Buddha taught. So dependent origination does not imply interdependence, even though that's often how it's taught. They're two completely different words, even though people take license with just saying, well, dependent means interdependence. It doesn't mean interconnected. It certainly doesn't mean that we are interbeing with anything or anyone or each other. It simply describes the individual process of suffering arises due to ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So now, just to get back to that point, so forgetting about, because it's so important, about where we came from, how we got here, how were we born, where were we before, where are we going after? Those are all things that the Buddha said are just distractions from understanding the truth. In fact, he would often say those questions regarding those grand questions like that are questions rooted in ignorance. Let go of the question. The questions can only serve to further confuse us. And anybody that tries to supply answers to those questions is only going to confuse us. The Buddha never tried to. So in this sequence, rooted in ignorance to fabrications, to consciousness, ongoing thinking informed by fabrications and rooted in ignorance. Now, the sixth sense base is how that a human being, a person, is interacting with the world, with what they're coming in contact with. But what they're coming in contact with can only be interpreted through ignorance. This is the chain of events that's leading to suffering. From contact as a requisite condition comes feeling. Makes sense, doesn't it? And from feeling as a requisite condition comes craving. And craving has really three qualities. We want more of something, we want less of something, or we're ambiguous. We don't want, we're bored by it, or it doesn't give us anything to hold on to and to keep our mind united with our body. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. From clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming. So those last two, once we are self-identifying with anything that's occurred, lay down. Great. You're particularly excited about this talk. Lay down. Come on. Lay down. You're right next screen. Come on. Once we have self-identified for something, meaning we've decided that we need more of something or less of something to be happy and safe and secure, immediately clinging takes place. We've decided, we've conditioned our minds towards something, towards wanting something or not wanting something. Or we've conditioned our minds away from simply being present with nothing having control of our consciousness, a distracted mind. And that leads to clinging and maintaining what? Clinging to and maintaining that initial ignorance. In the next line, from clinging and maintaining comes becoming. And there's never any qualifier or modifier after that initial statement of comes becoming, because in the context, it doesn't need a modifier. It doesn't becoming, the question isn't becoming what? In this context, the context is becoming further ignorant. Of course, through the Dhamma, we gain the choice of either continuing to become further ignorant or to develop the Eightfold Path as the Buddha taught it without adaptations, accommodations, or embellishments. And then we are instilling within ourselves the opportunity to become awakened. From becoming as a requisite condition comes birth in the sequence now. So again, this isn't a physical birth story, and it's not a origin of the universe story, although it's often depicted, particularly those that follow the Abhidhamma and discount the actual teachings of the Buddha from the Sutta Pitaka. Look at again in sequence, comes birth of what? Comes the birth of a moment, an experience of ignorance. That's the significance of from becoming as a requisite condition comes birth. In the sequence, it's giving birth to a moment rooted in ignorance. Lay down, Bobes. Come on. Come on, lay down. Come on. You're often quiet when I do this. From birth as a requisite condition, then comes sickness, aging, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair. Such is the origination of the entire mass of confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering. The entire mass known as dukkha. So very, very clearly, this is dependent origination is what the Buddha awakened to. And his very first teaching then was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the sutta setting in wheel, the only time that wheel was set in motion, setting in wheel the Four Noble Truths. Everything the Buddha would teach for his entire 45-year teaching career was taught in the context of dependent origination and Four Noble Truths. And so following these 12 links of dependent in their origination, it's clear to see what we must do if we're going to become awakened. We must recognize that we are ignorant, very specific ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and develop a profound understanding of those Four Noble Truths through that fourth Noble Truth of the Eightfold Path. And so now so tonight's talk is going to be on, there's 3 talks on the website on becoming Buddha, on becoming, the meaning of becoming, I'm sorry. The Loka Sutta, the Bhava Sutta, which I'll be giving a talk on a little bit later on this evening. And then next week on the Mula Sutta. but they all explain in slightly different ways what the Buddha means by becoming and what we should understand, because this points to the whole purpose and scope of Dhamma practice. The Loka Sutta, the newly awakened Siddhartha, now Buddha, was enjoying the peace of release, meaning release from all wrong views, from views rooted in ignorance. That's what he awakened to. Established in concentration, he observed the world around him. He noticed human beings aflame with the fires of passion, born of defilements, the fires of aversion and deluded consciousness. Realizing the significance of what he was seeing, he thought, the world is aflame, rooted in ignorance, my words here, rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Rooted in ignorance, the world is afflicted by sensory contact and perceived suffering as self. The Buddha often talks about joining with our suffering through self-identification, through taking what's occurring in the world as a completely impersonal experience and taking it personally. The sutta that we're reviewing this week and probably for the next few weeks, the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, which is up on the website, goes into this in the clearest detail I've ever come across about the complete impersonal nature of human life, and yet through ignorance we personalize every single event. In fact, every thought that occurs, if we're still rooted in ignorance, it's taken personally, and we can't do anything else about that unless we have a framework to recognize it. Rooted in ignorance, it misunderstands self and becomes anything other than self. Could be a confusing line, but it simply means because we misunderstand who we are, we have now developed a fabricated view, a perverted view of who we are in relation to the world, and we become anything other than self. And that includes any type of imaginary, non-physical establishment of ourselves. But literally what it means is moment by moment, our view of ourselves is anything other than what constitutes the self. And notice here that Buddha's not saying that great misunderstanding so common in Zen practice and some other ones, that there's no such thing as a self and there's nothingness or the emptiness is what we all are in. There's nothing in the Buddha's teaching like that. He's simply saying that what we think of as a self is anatta, not a self. It's the views that are wrong. It's not that there's no such thing as a self. The Buddha continues, becoming anything other than self, the world clings to becoming, is afflicted by becoming, and yet delights in that very becoming. Again, follow the sequence. Becoming anything other than self, which means we've established an imaginary self, a fabricated self. We have now become other than what a self is. And we are afflicted by that very fabricated, imagined existence. And yet we delight in that very becoming. Why? Because we created it. Where there is delight, there is fear. Where there is fear, there is stress. And as you can see, it's all of our own doing rooted in that initial ignorance. The Buddha continues, the life integrated with the Eightfold Path is lived solely for the abandoning of becoming. A remarkable sutta and a remarkable line. The Buddha taught this Eightfold Path for this specific reason, so that we can avoid becoming further ignorant and having a life experience based on that. Those that say that escape from becoming is by non-becoming are never released from becoming, I declare, including the common teachings that we should aspire to dimensions of nothingness or aspire to non-physical establishments such as the dimension of infinitude or the dimension of infinitude of space or infinite consciousness, or even an inner or outer within this thing of ours called Buddha nature or Buddhahood. They're all rooted in this wrong sense of becoming. And as the Buddha says, they're never released from becoming further ignorant, he declares. Stress arises in dependence on becoming self, always attaching ourselves to what we need and what we use to describe ourselves to ourselves and the world around us. With the ending of clinging to self and maintaining self, no stress will arise. It relates directly back to dependent origination. When we can undo that process and stop clinging to ignorant views of self and stop clinging to maintaining this self, which is simply an imagined self, no stress will arise. Look at the world. Human beings afflicted with ignorance crave for and cling to becoming. All forms of becoming, anywhere, in any way, are impermanent. Any type of establishment of ourselves through self-identification in imaginary realms, meaning anything that's rooted in ignorance, they are impermanent, they're stressful, and they're always subject to change. Knowing this, the arising and the passing away from right view, craving for becoming and non-becoming is abandoned. From right view, craving for becoming and non-becoming is simply abandoned. From the abandonment of craving for becoming and non-becoming comes unbinding, and it's unbinding from clinging to those wrong views. For those unbound from lack of clinging and maintaining, there is no further becoming, meaning no further becoming ignorant. They have conquered ignorance, completed the task, and have gone beyond becoming further ignorant, meaning becoming a self rooted in ignorance. That's the end of that sutta. It's such a profound sutta, but it gets to the heart of the matter. It speaks to the importance of developing an understanding of what constitutes the three marks of existence and how a mind rooted in ignorance can only continue that ignorance if it continues becoming based on that initial ignorance. And so the Buddha taught a singular path to get out of that ignorance, to recognize and abandon all ignorance. And that's the Eightfold Path. It is the only path that an awakened human being ever taught. There's many other modern Buddhist paths, and none of them present solely the Eightfold Path. And the reason why I'm saying that is there's a few modern Buddhist practices that mention the Eightfold Path. And they might even do like we'll review what that looks like. But it was never, the Eightfold Path is not just a concept to be reviewed once in a while. It is the entire path. And those that can see that, as the Buddha would say, have little dust in their eyes, and they take to the Eightfold Path without adapting, accommodating, or embellishing it, meaning adding things to it or listening to modern commentators or modern psychologists about all of this. They simply develop an Eightfold Path as the Buddha described it, and so they ceased becoming further ignorant. So that's the first talk on of these three on the meaning of becoming. Again, later on tonight at 7:15. Well, this isn't live anyway, so nobody's going to know that my talk later on this evening will be on the Bhava Sutta, and then next Thursday I'll give a live talk. Also tonight's talk and next week's talk will be on the new streaming platform. That's you can find that info on my website and in the emails. So thank you for watching. If you find benefit from this talk, please consider a donation at becoming-buddha.com. Thank you. Peace.